The Mountain is You, by Brianna Wiest. Part 1. The most difficult mountain you'll ever climb. Imagine waking up every morning with a dream. A dream so clear you can almost touch it. You know exactly what you want. A better life, more confidence, financial freedom, a healthier body, a happier relationship, a successful career. You know where you want to go. Yet somehow, every time you start moving toward that dream, something pulls you backward. You procrastinate. You overthink. You quit too soon. You doubt yourself. You sabotage opportunities. And before long, you're standing exactly where you started. Sound familiar? If so, you're not alone. Because the greatest obstacle most people face is not a lack of talent. Not a lack of intelligence. Not bad luck. Not even difficult circumstances. The greatest obstacle is often themselves. And that is the central message of The Mountain is You by Brianna Wiest. This is not a book about conquering the world. It's a book about conquering yourself. Because the mountain standing in your way isn't outside of you. The mountain is you. And today, we're going to explore this life-changing idea through the story of a young man named Ethan. His story might feel uncomfortably familiar. Because in many ways, it's the story of all of us. Ethan's invisible enemy. From the outside, Ethan seemed capable. Smart. Hardworking. Full of potential. Friends often told him, "You could do amazing things if you really wanted to." The problem wasn't that Ethan lacked ability. The problem was consistency. Every time an opportunity appeared, he somehow found a way to ruin it. He would start a project with enthusiasm. Then abandon it. He would create goals. Then ignore them. He would dream about success. Then spend hours distracting himself. One year he promised himself he would get healthier. He bought workout clothes. Downloaded fitness apps. Watched motivational videos. For 2 weeks he exercised consistently. Then he missed one workout. Then another. Then another. Within a month, everything disappeared. The same pattern repeated in every area of his life. Career, money, relationships, personal growth. It felt like he was trapped in an endless cycle. Move forward, fall back, move forward, fall back. And the more it happened, the more frustrated he became. One night, sitting alone in his apartment, he asked himself a painful question. Why do I keep getting in my own way? That question would change everything. Because for the first time, Ethan stopped blaming the world. And started looking inward. The discovery of self-sabotage. Most people think self-sabotage is irrational. Why would anyone deliberately hurt their own success? Why would someone destroy opportunities they desperately want? At first glance, it doesn't make sense. But Brianna Wiest explains something powerful. Self-sabotage is not proof that you're broken. It's often proof that part of you is trying to protect you. Think about that. What if your procrastination isn't laziness? What if your fear isn't weakness? What if your resistance is actually a survival mechanism? Ethan couldn't stop thinking about this idea. As he reflected on his life, he noticed a pattern. Every time he got close to success, fear appeared. Not fear of failure. Fear of change. Because success would require a new version of himself. More responsibility. More visibility. More expectations. And deep down, part of him wasn't ready. His mind preferred familiarity. Even when familiarity made him unhappy. Because the brain values safety more than happiness. Safety feels predictable. Known. Comfortable. The unknown feels dangerous. And that's why people often remain stuck. Not because they want misery, but because misery feels familiar. The comfort zone trap. Imagine a prisoner who has spent years inside a small cell. The door suddenly opens. Freedom awaits. But instead of running outside, the prisoner hesitates. Why? Because the cell is familiar. The outside world is uncertain. Strange. Unpredictable. Many people live exactly this way. Their comfort zone becomes a prison. A prison made of routines, habits, excuses, fear, and limiting beliefs. Ethan realized he had built his own prison. Every excuse reinforced the walls. Every delay strengthened the bars. Every abandoned goal tightened the lock. The prison wasn't created by other people. It was created by his own patterns. And for the first time, he understood something profound. The problem wasn't the mountain. The problem was how he kept climbing it. The story of the burning house. One afternoon, Ethan heard a story that stayed with him. A family lived in a house that had serious structural damage. The roof leaked. The walls cracked. The foundation weakened. Yet they never repaired it. Why? Because fixing the damage would require effort, money, discomfort, temporary inconvenience. Then one day a storm arrived. The damage became impossible to ignore. The house began collapsing, and suddenly the family had no choice but to act. Brianna Wiest argues that emotional healing often works the same way. We ignore problems, suppress emotions, avoid difficult conversations, pretend everything is fine, until life forces us to confront what we've been avoiding. The mountain grows larger every year we refuse to climb it. And eventually it becomes impossible to ignore. Ethan realized he had spent years avoiding himself. Avoiding difficult truths. Avoiding uncomfortable emotions. Avoiding the real reasons he felt stuck. But avoidance never solves problems. It only postpones them. The emotional backpack. Imagine carrying a backpack. Every disappointment adds weight. Every fear adds weight. Every rejection adds weight. Every unresolved emotion adds weight. At first, the backpack feels manageable. But over time it becomes heavier. And heavier. And heavier. Until eventually, every step feels exhausting. Many people believe they're struggling because life is difficult. Sometimes they're struggling because they're carrying emotional weight they never released. Ethan began examining his backpack. Old failures. Childhood insecurities. Fear of judgment. Fear of rejection. Fear of not being enough. For years he ignored these emotions. Yet they quietly influenced every decision he made. This was one of the biggest lessons in the book. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. The emotions you avoid don't disappear. They remain beneath the surface, influencing your behavior, shaping your choices, creating patterns you don't fully understand. Healing begins when honesty begins. The mountain reveals itself. For years, Ethan believed the mountain was external. A difficult economy, limited opportunities, bad circumstances, unfair situations. But slowly he realized something different. The mountain wasn't outside. The mountain was inside. It was built from fear, limiting beliefs, unhealed emotions, old patterns, and unconscious habits. The mountain wasn't his enemy. The mountain was a mirror, showing him exactly what needed to be transformed. And that's what makes this book so powerful. Most people spend their lives trying to change their circumstances. Few spend enough time changing themselves. But transformation begins internally. The outer world often changes only after the inner world changes first. Ethan has finally identified the real mountain standing in his way. But awareness alone isn't enough. In the next chapter, he'll discover why people become addicted to their own suffering, how emotional patterns secretly control behavior, and why the path to transformation requires facing the parts of ourselves we've spent years avoiding. Part 2. Why we become addicted to our own struggles. By now, Ethan had made an unsettling discovery. The biggest obstacle in his life wasn't outside of him. It was inside him. His fears, his habits, his emotional wounds, his unconscious patterns. But another question remained. If these patterns were causing so much pain, why did he keep repeating them? Why would anyone continue behaviors that make life harder? The answer surprised him. Because sometimes people don't become addicted to success. They become addicted to familiar emotions. And that realization would completely change how Ethan understood himself. The invisible loop. Every morning, Ethan promised himself things would be different. Today he would be productive. Today he would focus. Today he would finally take action. But by evening, the same thing happened. Hours disappeared. Important tasks remained unfinished. Frustration returned. Then guilt arrived. The next morning, he repeated the cycle. For years he believed he lacked discipline. But Brianna Wiest suggests something deeper. Often, Self-sabotage is an emotional pattern, not a productivity problem. The behavior is only the symptom. The emotion underneath is the real issue. Imagine a person who constantly worries. Over time, worrying becomes familiar, predictable, comfortable in a strange way. Even when life is calm, their mind searches for new things to worry about. Not because they enjoy anxiety, but because anxiety has become normal. Many people live this way, repeating emotional experiences they've known for years, without realizing it. The story of the old radio station. One evening, Ethan imagined his mind as an old radio. For years it had been tuned to the same station. The station played familiar messages. You're not good enough. You'll probably fail. Don't get your hopes up. People will judge you. Stay where it's safe. The problem was that Ethan had listened to these messages for so long that they sounded like truth. But they weren't truth. They were repetition. And repetition often disguises itself as reality. Think about it. If you hear the same thought every day for 10 years, eventually you stop questioning it. You accept it, even if it's completely false. Brianna Wiest argues that transformation begins when we recognize the difference between truth and conditioning. Not every thought deserves your trust. Not every fear deserves your obedience. Not every emotion deserves control over your life. Sometimes the voice in your head is simply an old radio station playing outdated messages. And growth begins when you change the channel. The hidden benefits of staying stuck. This idea disturbed Ethan more than anything else. Because it forced him to ask a difficult question. What am I gaining from staying stuck? At first the question felt ridiculous. What could anyone gain from anxiety? Procrastination, fear, self-sabotage. Then the answers appeared. Staying stuck protected him from rejection. If he never tried, he never failed. Staying stuck protected him from criticism. If he stayed invisible, nobody judged him. Staying stuck protected him from disappointment. If he expected nothing, he couldn't be hurt. Suddenly everything made sense. His behaviors weren't random. They were protective, unhealthy, limiting, but protective. This is one of the book's most important insights. Many destructive behaviors exist because they once served a purpose. Perhaps they protected you during a difficult time, helped you survive a painful experience, or shielded you from emotional harm. The problem arises when old survival strategies continue long after the danger has passed. The child inside the adult. Imagine a child touching a hot stove. The experience creates fear. The fear protects the child from future harm. That's healthy. But imagine the child grows into an adult who becomes terrified of every kitchen. Now the protection has become a limitation. Many emotional patterns work exactly this way. A painful experience creates a belief. The belief creates behavior. The behavior becomes a habit. The habit becomes an identity. And eventually, the person forgets where it began. Ethan started tracing his fears back to their origins. His fear of failure. His fear of judgment. His fear of being seen. Most of them weren't created yesterday. Many began years earlier. Some during childhood. Some during difficult moments he had never fully processed. For the first time, he understood something powerful. Healing wasn't about blaming the past. It was about understanding it. Because understanding creates freedom. The emotional home. Brianna Wiest introduces another fascinating idea. Every person has an emotional home. Not a physical place. An emotional state. It's the feeling that feels most familiar. For some people, it's confidence. For others, it's peace. But for many people, it's anxiety, stress, chaos, or self-doubt. Even when life improves, they unconsciously return to those emotions. Because familiarity feels safe. Imagine someone who spends years living in a noisy city. When they move somewhere quiet, the silence feels uncomfortable. Not because silence is bad, but because it isn't familiar. The same thing happens emotionally. Ethan realized he often returned to stress even when things were going well. Part of him didn't know how to exist without it. The chaos had become home. And if he wanted transformation, he needed to create a new emotional home. One built on peace rather than fear. confidence rather than self-doubt, trust rather than anxiety. The river of change. One weekend, Ethan visited a river near his hometown. As he watched the water move, he noticed something. The river never fought to keep yesterday's water. It simply allowed the current to flow. Yet humans often do the opposite. We cling to old identities, old pain, old stories, old versions of ourselves. Even when they've outlived their purpose, we hold on because letting go feels uncertain. But transformation requires release. You cannot become someone new while desperately clinging to who you've always been. The river taught Ethan a lesson. Growth isn't just about adding things. Sometimes it's about letting things go. Letting go of limiting beliefs. Letting go of outdated identities. Letting go of emotional baggage. Letting go of stories that no longer serve you. Only then can new growth emerge. The courage to feel. Most people spend years running from emotions. They distract themselves, suppress feelings, stay busy, seek constant stimulation, anything to avoid discomfort. But Brianna Wiest argues something different. The path to healing is through emotions, not around them. Ethan spent years avoiding sadness, avoiding disappointment, avoiding fear, yet the emotions never disappeared. They simply waited beneath the surface. One evening, instead of distracting himself, he sat quietly. He allowed himself to feel everything he had been avoiding. The fear, the uncertainty, the grief, the frustration. It wasn't comfortable, but something surprising happened. The emotions became less overwhelming. Because emotions often grow stronger when resisted, and weaker when acknowledged. The things we avoid tend to control us. The things we face begin to lose power. The beginning of real change. By now, Ethan was beginning to understand the mountain differently. The mountain wasn't punishment. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't proof of failure. It was an invitation to heal, to grow, to transform, to become someone stronger than the person who first encountered the challenge. The mountain wasn't blocking the path. The mountain was the path. And every step upward required greater self-awareness, greater honesty, greater courage. For the first time, Ethan stopped asking, "How do I get rid of my problems?" and started asking, "What are my problems trying to teach me?" That shift changed everything. Because transformation begins the moment we stop running from ourselves and start listening. End of part 2. Ethan has uncovered the emotional roots of his self-sabotage. But understanding the problem is only the beginning. In the next chapter, he'll learn how to reprogram limiting beliefs, build a new identity, and create lasting change instead of temporary motivation. Part 3. Becoming the person who can climb the mountain. By now, Ethan understood something most people never realize. His greatest enemy wasn't failure. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a lack of opportunity. It was the collection of unconscious beliefs that had quietly guided his life for years. The beliefs that whispered, "You're not ready. You're not capable. You're not enough." For a long time, Ethan thought these thoughts were facts. But now he was beginning to see them differently. They were stories. And stories can be rewritten. The challenge was figuring out how. Because identifying a limiting belief is one thing, replacing it is another. And that journey would require Ethan to become someone he had never been before. The architect of identity. One rainy afternoon, Ethan sat in a coffee shop watching construction workers across the street. A large building was being built from the ground up. Steel beams, concrete foundations, massive machinery. Everything seemed carefully planned. As he watched, a thought occurred to him. No one starts building a skyscraper by placing random bricks. Everything begins with a blueprint. The same is true for life. Every action comes from an identity. Every habit comes from a belief. Every decision comes from a story about who we think we are. If someone believes they are healthy, they naturally make healthier choices. If someone believes they are disciplined, they naturally act with greater discipline. If someone believes they are capable, they approach challenges differently. But if someone believes they are a failure, that belief influences everything. And that's where Ethan discovered a painful truth. He had spent years trying to change his behavior without changing his identity. He was attempting to build a new life using an old blueprint. And it wasn't working. The broken thermostat. Imagine a thermostat set to 65 degrees. No matter how much heat enters the room, the thermostat eventually brings the temperature back to its setting. Many people operate the same way. They have an internal setting for success, an internal setting for happiness, an internal setting for self-worth. Whenever life exceeds that setting, they unconsciously pull themselves back down. Not because they want failure, but because their identity feels uncomfortable with higher levels of success. Ethan realized this described his life perfectly. Every time progress appeared, he found a way to sabotage it. Not intentionally, automatically, like a thermostat returning to its familiar temperature. And that meant lasting change required more than motivation. It required changing the setting itself. The story of the eagle. One evening, Ethan read an old story. A farmer discovered an eagle egg and placed it in a chicken coop. The eagle hatched alongside the chickens. It ate what they ate, walked where they walked, lived exactly as they lived. Years passed. One day the eagle looked into the sky and saw a magnificent bird soaring through the clouds. "What is that?" the eagle asked. "That's an eagle," replied the chickens. "The king of birds." The eagle stared in amazement. "I wish I could fly like that." The chickens laughed. "You can't. You're a chicken." Eventually the eagle accepted their answer, and spent the rest of its life scratching at the ground, never realizing what it truly was. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about that story. How many people spend their entire lives living beneath their potential because of what they believe about themselves? How many dreams remain unfulfilled because someone accepted a false identity? How many mountains remain unclimbed because someone convinced themselves they couldn't climb? The tragedy isn't lack of ability. The tragedy is forgotten potential. The power of tiny evidence. For years, Ethan tried using positive affirmations. He would stand in front of a mirror and say, "I am confident. I am successful. I am fearless." Yet deep down, he didn't believe any of it. Because his mind immediately responded, "No, you're not." Brianna Wiest explains that real transformation doesn't come from pretending. It comes from evidence. Tiny pieces of evidence. Imagine someone who wants to become a runner. Instead of repeating, "I am a runner," they begin jogging for 5 minutes a day. Then 10. Then 15. Over time, evidence accumulates. And eventually the identity changes naturally. Ethan realized he didn't need to convince himself he was confident. He needed to collect evidence. One courageous conversation. One difficult task completed. One promise kept. One fear faced. Each action became proof. And proof is more powerful than motivation. Because motivation fades, evidence remains. The garden of the mind. A mentor once told Ethan, "Your mind is a garden." At first, the statement sounded simple, almost obvious. But the mentor continued, "If you don't plant intentionally, weeds grow automatically. The same thing happens mentally. If you don't choose your thoughts carefully, old fears return. Old beliefs return. Old patterns return. Nature dislikes empty space. And so does the mind. This is why personal growth requires consistency. Not because you're broken, but because maintenance is part of being human. Just as a garden requires regular care, your mindset requires regular attention. Every day you are planting seeds. The books you read, the people you spend time with, the content you consume, the thoughts you repeat, the habits you practice. Eventually those seeds become your reality. The question is, what are you planting? The fear of becoming different. One of the most surprising lessons Ethan learned was that growth often creates loneliness. Not permanent loneliness, but temporary loneliness. Because when you change, some relationships change too. Some people celebrate your growth. Others feel threatened by it. Some encourage your transformation. Others prefer the old version of you. The version they understand. The version they expect. The version that doesn't challenge them. At first, this frightened Ethan. He wanted everyone to approve of his growth. But eventually he realized something important. Not everyone is meant to travel every part of your journey with you. And that's okay. Growth sometimes requires leaving familiar environments, familiar habits, familiar identities, because the person you're becoming cannot always remain where the person you were felt comfortable. The mountain gets steeper. As Ethan continued growing, something unexpected happened. Life didn't become easier. In some ways, it became harder. The challenges grew bigger. The responsibilities increased. The expectations expanded. At first, he thought something was wrong. Shouldn't growth eliminate problems? Then he realized the truth. Growth doesn't remove mountains. It prepares you to climb larger ones. A beginner struggles with small obstacles. A stronger person faces bigger challenges. The goal isn't a life without mountains. The goal is becoming someone capable of climbing them. And that shift changed everything. Because success is not measured by the absence of difficulty. It's measured by your ability to handle difficulty. The first real victory. Months after beginning his journey, Ethan noticed something remarkable. The external changes were still modest. His life wasn't perfect. He wasn't rich. He hadn't achieved every goal. Yet internally, everything felt different. For the first time, he trusted himself. Not completely. Not perfectly. But more than before. And trust changes everything. Because when you trust yourself, you stop depending entirely on motivation. You stop waiting for ideal conditions. You stop searching for constant inspiration. You simply keep moving, one step at a time, one decision at a time, one habit at a time. That quiet self-trust became Ethan's first real victory. And it was more valuable than any external achievement. Because external success can disappear. But self-trust becomes a foundation. End of part 3. Ethan is beginning to transform his identity and build a stronger foundation. But a new challenge awaits. In the next chapter, he'll discover why emotional intelligence is the true key to lasting change, why most people misunderstand their feelings, and how mastering emotions can unlock extraordinary personal growth. Part 4. Learning the language of emotions. For most of his life, Ethan believed emotions were obstacles. Fear got in the way. Anxiety slowed him down. Sadness made him weak. Anger caused problems. So whenever uncomfortable emotions appeared, he did what many people do. He ignored them, distracted himself, stayed busy, watched videos, scrolled endlessly, filled every moment with noise. Anything to avoid feeling what he didn't want to feel. But the emotions never disappeared. They simply waited, quietly, patiently, beneath the surface. And the more Ethan ignored them, the louder they eventually became. It was like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. For a while, it worked. But sooner or later, the ball always came shooting back up. And that's when Ethan discovered one of the most important lessons in the mountain is you. Your emotions are not your enemies. They are messengers. The problem begins when you refuse to listen. The smoke alarm. Imagine you're asleep in your house. Suddenly, a smoke alarm starts blaring. The sound is annoying, loud, disruptive. You have two choices. You can smash the alarm and silence the noise. Or you can investigate the fire. Many people spend their lives smashing alarms. They suppress emotions, avoid difficult conversations, numb themselves with distractions, pretend everything is fine, but the fire remains. Because emotions are often signals. They are trying to tell us something. Fear may reveal an area where growth is needed. Anger may reveal a violated boundary. Sadness may reveal something important that has been lost. Anxiety may reveal unresolved uncertainty. The goal isn't to silence emotions. The goal is to understand them. When Ethan grasped this idea, his relationship with emotions began to change. Instead of asking, "How do I stop feeling this?" he started asking, "What is this feeling trying to teach me?" And that question opened a door he had never noticed before. The locked basement. One night Ethan dreamed he was living in a large house. The house looked beautiful. Bright windows, clean rooms, elegant furniture. But there was one place he never visited. The basement. The door remained locked. And every time he walked past it, he felt uneasy. Eventually curiosity became stronger than fear. He unlocked the door, slowly descended the stairs, and discovered something surprising. The basement wasn't filled with monsters. It was filled with things he had forgotten. Old memories, old fears, old disappointments, old versions of himself. When Ethan woke up, the dream felt symbolic. Because many people spend years avoiding their emotional basement. The parts of themselves they don't want to confront. The mistakes they regret. The pain they haven't processed. The fears they haven't faced. Yet healing begins when we stop avoiding the basement. And start exploring it. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's necessary. The things hidden in darkness often gain power. The things brought into the light begin to lose it. The difference between pain and suffering. A mentor once told Ethan something he never forgot. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. At first, Ethan didn't understand. Pain seemed painful. How could suffering be optional? The mentor explained. Pain is a natural part of life. Loss, rejection, disappointment, failure, heartbreak. No one escapes these experiences. But suffering often comes from resistance. From replaying the story endlessly. From fighting reality. From wishing the past had been different. Imagine being caught in a rainstorm. You can accept the rain and find shelter. Or you can stand outside screaming at the sky. The rain continues either way. One response creates peace. The other creates suffering. For years, Ethan resisted many things he couldn't change. Old mistakes, missed opportunities, past failures. And that resistance created unnecessary suffering. Eventually he learned that acceptance is not surrender. Acceptance is simply seeing reality clearly. And clear vision is the first step toward change. The emotional compass. As Ethan became more self-aware, he noticed something fascinating. Every emotion pointed somewhere. Like a compass. Fear pointed toward growth. Jealousy pointed toward hidden desires. Frustration pointed toward unresolved problems. Excitement pointed toward opportunities. Disappointment pointed toward unmet expectations. Instead of viewing emotions as random, he began viewing them as information. Not commands. Information. That's an important distinction. Many people believe emotions should control decisions. But Brianna Wiest suggests something different. Emotions are valuable guides, but terrible masters. Imagine driving a car. The dashboard provides useful information. Speed, fuel, engine temperature. But you wouldn't let the dashboard steer the vehicle. Likewise, emotions provide information. But wisdom determines how to respond. Learning this distinction transformed Ethan's life. Because he stopped being controlled by every feeling that appeared. And started learning from them instead. The story of the broken mirror. One afternoon, Ethan accidentally dropped a mirror. The glass shattered across the floor. As he cleaned the pieces, a thought occurred to him. For years, he had viewed himself through a broken mirror. Every flaw appeared larger. Every mistake appeared permanent. Every weakness seemed overwhelming. The reflection wasn't accurate. It was distorted. Many people live this way. They see themselves through the lens of past failures, past criticism, past disappointments, and eventually they mistake the distortion for reality. Brianna Wiest teaches that healing requires developing a more honest relationship with yourself. Not an overly positive one. Not an overly negative one. An honest one. Honesty recognizes strengths without arrogance. Weaknesses without shame. Progress without perfection. This balance creates self-awareness. And self-awareness creates growth. The art of emotional maturity. As months passed, Ethan noticed another shift. He became less reactive. Not because life became easier. But because he became stronger. When problems appeared, he paused before responding. When criticism arrived, he listened before reacting. When fear emerged, he examined it before obeying it. This is emotional maturity. Not the absence of emotions. The ability to manage them wisely. Children react immediately. Adults respond intentionally. The difference may seem small. But it changes everything. A single pause can prevent an argument. A moment of reflection can prevent a bad decision. A deeper understanding can prevent years of repeating the same pattern. Emotional maturity isn't something you're born with. It's something you develop. One experience at a time. One lesson at a time. One conscious choice at a time. The day Ethan stopped running. One evening, Ethan sat alone in silence. No music. No television. No phone. No distractions. Just himself. And for the first time in years, he wasn't running. Not from fear. Not from sadness. Not from uncertainty. He simply sat with whatever appeared. And something remarkable happened. The emotions that once seemed overwhelming began to feel manageable. Because they were no longer being resisted. He realized that many of his struggles had grown larger because he spent years avoiding them. The mountain looked impossible from a distance, but when he finally started climbing, it became manageable one step at a time. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. Most fears become smaller when faced. Most problems become clearer when examined. Most emotions become lighter when acknowledged. The mountain loses power when you stop running from it. End of part 4. Ethan has learned to understand his emotions instead of fearing them. But another challenge remains. In the next chapter, he'll discover how to let go of the past, break free from old identities, and stop carrying emotional baggage that has weighed him down for years. Part 5. Letting go of the person you used to be. By this point in his journey, Ethan had learned something many people spend a lifetime avoiding. The mountain wasn't outside of him. The mountain was within him. His fears, his beliefs, his emotional wounds, his old patterns. And while understanding these things was powerful, a new challenge emerged. Perhaps the hardest challenge of all. Letting go. Because transformation isn't only about becoming someone new. It's also about releasing the person you've outgrown. And that's far more difficult than most people realize. The weight of the suitcase. Imagine preparing for a long journey. You pack a suitcase. At first, everything inside seems important. A few clothes, some supplies, a few personal items. But then you begin adding more. And more. And more. Eventually the suitcase becomes so heavy that carrying it feels exhausting. Now imagine discovering that half the items inside aren't necessary. Old papers, broken objects, things you've carried for years without questioning. Wouldn't it make sense to leave them behind? Most people understand this physically. But emotionally, they do the opposite. They carry old regrets, old disappointments, old fears, old identities, year after year. Without ever asking, do I still need this? Ethan realized he had been carrying emotional luggage for years. And much of it no longer belonged in his life. The story he kept repeating. One afternoon, Ethan was talking with a friend. As they spoke, he noticed something strange. He kept telling the same story. The story of the opportunity he missed. The relationship that failed. The mistake he made years ago. The moment he embarrassed himself. The event that convinced him he wasn't good enough. Over and over again, he repeated these memories. Not because they were happening now, but because they had become part of his identity. Then his friend asked a question. A question so simple it felt almost unfair. What would happen if you stopped telling that story? Ethan laughed. Then he became quiet, because he didn't know the answer. For years, those stories had helped define who he was. Without them, who would he become? That question stayed with him for weeks. Because many people aren't trapped by their past. They're trapped by the story they continue telling about their past. The river and the rock. One weekend, Ethan returned to the river he had visited months earlier. As he sat beside the water, he noticed a large rock in the middle of the current. The river continued flowing. Day after day, year after year. The water never argued with the rock. Never fought it, never complained. It simply moved around it. Eventually shaping it, transforming it, changing it through persistence. Ethan realized he had spent years fighting reality. Fighting things that had already happened. Wishing the past were different. Replaying old conversations. Imagining different outcomes. But reality doesn't change because we resist it. It changes when we work with it. The river taught him another lesson. Life moves forward, and healing often begins when we stop demanding that the past become different. The identity prison. Brianna Wiest explains that one of the biggest obstacles to growth is attachment to identity. People become attached to labels, attached to roles, attached to stories, attached to versions of themselves that no longer fit. Imagine a snake trying to grow without shedding its skin. Eventually growth becomes impossible. The old skin becomes a prison. The same thing happens psychologically. Someone says, "I'm an anxious person. I'm a failure. I'm always unlucky. I'm not confident. I'm not good with people." The more these statements are repeated, the stronger the prison becomes. Ethan recognized this pattern immediately. For years he had introduced himself to himself using old labels. Labels created by painful experiences. Labels created by fear. Labels created by temporary circumstances. And somewhere along the way, he had mistaken those labels for reality. But a label is not an identity. A past experience is not a destiny. A mistake is not a life sentence. The tree that refused to grow. An old gardener once told Ethan a story. There were two trees planted side by side. The first tree embraced every season. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. When leaves fell, it released them. When growth came, it accepted it. When storms arrived, it adapted. The second tree resisted change. It clung desperately to old leaves. Fought every season. Refused every transition. Over time, it became weak. Rigid. Unable to grow. The lesson was obvious. Growth requires release. You cannot become who you're meant to be while desperately holding onto who you used to be. And yet many people try. They carry outdated beliefs, expired dreams, old identities, then wonder why progress feels impossible. Transformation always requires space, and space only appears when something old is released. Forgiveness isn't what you think. One of the most difficult lessons Ethan encountered involved forgiveness. For years he believed forgiveness meant approving of what happened, agreeing with it, pretending it didn't hurt. But Brianna Wiest presents a different perspective. Forgiveness is not about excusing behavior. It's about freeing yourself from carrying it forever. Imagine holding a heavy stone. At first it feels manageable. But after hours, your arm hurts. After days, you're exhausted. After years, you're barely moving. The stone isn't hurting the person who gave it to you. It's hurting you. Forgiveness is setting the stone down. Not because the past was acceptable, but because your future matters more than your resentment. Ethan realized he had been carrying stones for years. Some placed there by others. Some placed there by himself. And every stone slowed his progress up the mountain. The mirror of self-forgiveness. Yet the hardest forgiveness wasn't directed toward others. It was directed toward himself. The opportunities he wasted. The goals he abandoned. The mistakes he regretted. The years he felt he had lost. Whenever he thought about the past, shame appeared. But then he asked himself a question. If I met a younger version of myself, would I judge him the way I judge myself today? The answer was no. He would understand. He would encourage. He would offer compassion. Then another realization appeared. Why was he willing to give understanding to everyone except himself? Self-forgiveness didn't erase the past. It simply allowed him to learn from it without remaining trapped inside it. And that changed everything. Because guilt can teach, but shame only imprisons. The empty room. Imagine entering a room filled with old furniture. Broken chairs. Damaged tables. Objects that no longer serve a purpose. The room feels crowded, uncomfortable, impossible to use properly. Now imagine removing everything unnecessary. Suddenly there is space. Light, possibility. The same principle applies emotionally. As Ethan released old stories, old labels, old resentment, and old guilt, something unexpected happened. He felt lighter, not because his life became perfect, but because he stopped carrying things that were never meant to be carried forever. And with that new space came possibility. Possibility for growth, possibility for peace, possibility for a new future. The mountain begins to change. For years, Ethan thought the mountain existed to stop him. to challenge him, to punish him. Now he saw something different. The mountain was shaping him. Every obstacle revealed a lesson. Every fear revealed an area for growth. Every setback revealed a hidden belief. Every challenge revealed an opportunity to become stronger. The mountain wasn't an enemy. It was a teacher. And the lessons were beginning to transform him. Not just his actions. Not just his habits. His entire way of seeing himself. And that's when Ethan realized something profound. The goal was never to conquer the mountain. The goal was to become the person capable of climbing it. End of part 5. Ethan has started releasing the emotional baggage that kept him trapped in the past. But the journey isn't over. In the next chapter, he'll discover how to build a new future, create lasting habits, and align his daily actions with the person he truly wants to become. Part 6. Building the future instead of escaping the past. For most of his life, Ethan focused on what he wanted to avoid. He wanted to avoid failure, avoid rejection, avoid embarrassment, avoid disappointment, avoid pain, and without realizing it, his entire life became organized around escape. But one day, while journaling, he noticed something strange. He had spent pages describing what he didn't want. Yet he had barely written anything about what he did want. That realization hit him hard. Because many people spend years running away from something. Very few spend enough time moving toward something. And that's where Ethan's next lesson began. The sailboat without a destination. Imagine a sailboat floating in the middle of the ocean. The boat is strong. The wind is favorable. The weather is clear. Yet the captain has no destination. Where will the boat go? Anywhere. Nowhere. Everywhere. Without a destination, even favorable conditions become useless. Brianna Wiest explains that transformation requires more than healing. It requires vision, a clear picture of the life you're building. Because if you don't know where you're going, you'll continue drifting. Ethan realized that much of his life had been reactive. He reacted to problems, reacted to fears, reacted to circumstances, but he rarely acted from purpose. He rarely asked, "What kind of life am I intentionally creating?" And that question changed the direction of everything. The future self-exercise. One evening, Ethan sat down with a notebook. Instead of writing about his current problems, he wrote about his future self. Not the fantasy version, not the perfect version, the realistic version that existed if he continued growing. He imagined waking up 5 years from now. What habits would that person have? How would that person think? How would that person spend their mornings? How would that person handle challenges? How would that person treat others? The exercise felt surprisingly emotional. Because for the first time, Ethan stopped focusing on fixing his flaws. And started focusing on building a future. Brianna Wiest emphasizes that lasting transformation happens when we become emotionally connected to who we're becoming. People don't change because they hate themselves enough. They change because they love their future enough. And Ethan was finally beginning to see that future clearly. The bricklayer's lesson. One afternoon, Ethan watched 3 construction workers laying bricks. Curious, he asked them what they were doing. The first worker replied, "I'm laying bricks." The second said, "I'm building a wall." The third smiled and answered, "I'm building a cathedral." All 3 were performing the same task. Yet each viewed it differently. The first saw labor. The second saw structure. The third saw purpose. The lesson was obvious. The meaning we attach to our actions changes everything. When Ethan exercised, he wasn't simply working out. He was building a healthier future. When he read books, he wasn't simply reading. He was investing in wisdom. When he faced difficult emotions, he wasn't suffering. He was growing. Purpose transformed ordinary actions into meaningful ones. And meaningful actions are easier to sustain. The myth of motivation. For years, Ethan believed successful people felt motivated all the time. They woke up inspired, excited, ready to conquer the world. Then he began studying highly successful people. And discovered something surprising. Many of them didn't rely on motivation. They relied on systems. Motivation is emotional. It comes and goes. Some days it's strong. Some days it's absent. Systems remain. A writer doesn't wait to feel inspired before writing. A musician doesn't wait to feel inspired before practicing. An athlete doesn't wait to feel inspired before training. They show up consistently. Because consistency beats intensity. A single extraordinary effort rarely changes a life. Thousands of ordinary efforts often do. This lesson transformed Ethan's approach to growth. Instead of chasing motivation, he focused on creating routines. Small routines, simple routines, sustainable routines. And over time, those routines began producing extraordinary results. The power of tiny wins. One of Ethan's biggest mistakes had always been aiming too high too quickly. He would create massive goals, huge plans, ambitious schedules, then become overwhelmed, eventually quitting altogether. Brianna Wiest explains that transformation often happens through small victories, tiny wins, manageable steps, incremental progress. Imagine trying to move a giant boulder. It seems impossible. But move it 1 inch every day, and eventually it changes location entirely. The same principle applies to life. A single page read daily becomes dozens of books. A short walk becomes improved health. A daily journal becomes greater self-awareness. Tiny actions create massive outcomes when repeated consistently. And because tiny actions feel achievable, they are easier to maintain. Ethan stopped asking, "How do I transform my entire life?" and started asking, "What's the next small step?" That question felt less overwhelming. And far more effective. The identity gap. As Ethan grew, he noticed something frustrating. Part of him still wanted to return to old habits, old behaviors, old comfort zones. At first, he worried this meant he wasn't changing. But Brianna Wiest explains that this is normal. Transformation creates an identity gap. The old self still exists. The new self is still developing. For a period of time, both versions coexist. Imagine renovating a house while living inside it. The process feels messy, unfinished, inconsistent. Yet progress is still happening. The same is true internally. Growth is rarely linear. Some days feel amazing. Others feel discouraging. Some days you move forward. Others feel like setbacks. The important thing is continuing. Because temporary discomfort often signals permanent transformation. The forest path. During a hiking trip, Ethan noticed something fascinating. A narrow trail wound through a dense forest. The path existed because countless people had walked it before. Every step reinforced the trail. Every traveler made it easier for the next. Habits work the same way. The first time you choose a new behavior, it feels difficult, unnatural, awkward. The second time feels slightly easier. The 10th time feels more familiar. Eventually, the new path becomes the default route. And the old path begins to disappear. This is how lasting change happens. Not through one dramatic decision. Through repetition. Through consistency. Through walking the new path until it becomes who you are. The shift from survival to creation. Perhaps the biggest transformation in Ethan's life was this. He stopped living in survival mode. For years, his focus had been protection. Avoiding mistakes. Avoiding pain. Avoiding discomfort. Now his focus was creation. Creating health. Creating opportunity. Creating meaningful relationships. Creating purpose. Creating a life aligned with his values. This shift changed everything. Because survival asks, "How do I stay safe?" Creation asks, "What can I build?" Survival contracts your world. Creation expands it. And for the first time, Ethan felt genuinely excited about the future. Not because everything was certain, but because he finally had direction. The mountain. From above. One evening, after months of growth, Ethan reached a high point on a mountain trail. As he looked back, he could see the path he had traveled. The twists, the obstacles, the difficult climbs, the steep sections, the moments he almost gave up. From above, everything looked different. The journey made sense. And that's often how growth works. While you're in the middle of the climb, progress feels slow, messy, confusing. But looking back reveals how far you've come. Ethan smiled. Because he finally understood. The mountain wasn't shrinking. He was growing. End of part 6. Ethan has stopped living for survival and started building a future with intention. In the next chapter, he'll discover the final and most powerful lesson of The Mountain Is You, how to fully trust himself, embrace uncertainty, and step into the life he was meant to create. Part 7. The Final Climb, Trusting Yourself Again. The mountain had changed Ethan. Or perhaps a better way to say it was this. The mountain had revealed Ethan. The version of himself that had been buried beneath fear. Beneath self-doubt. Beneath old stories. Beneath years of self-sabotage. For the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to become someone else. He wasn't chasing an identity. He wasn't searching for a shortcut. He wasn't waiting for permission. He was simply becoming who he had always been beneath the noise. And that realization marked the beginning of the final climb. The day the storm arrived. One afternoon, Ethan received disappointing news. A project he had spent months working on failed. A door he hoped would open remained closed. An opportunity disappeared. Years ago, this would have devastated him. He would have interpreted the setback as proof. Proof that he wasn't good enough. Proof that success wasn't meant for him. Proof that he should quit. But something was different now. He felt disappointed. Of course he did. He was human. But he wasn't destroyed. Because his identity was no longer tied to a single outcome. And that's one of the greatest signs of growth. When setbacks stop defining you. The storm still arrives. But it no longer controls your direction. The difference between confidence and self-trust. For years, Ethan believed he needed more confidence. Like many people, he thought confidence was the answer. If only he felt more confident. If only he felt more certain. If only he felt fearless. Then everything would change. But Brianna Wiest points towards something deeper. Confidence is believing things will work out. Self-trust is believing you'll be okay even if they don't. Read that again. Confidence depends on outcomes. Self-trust depends on you. And self-trust is far more powerful. Because life will always contain uncertainty. Some plans will fail. Some relationships will end. Some dreams will take longer than expected. But when you trust yourself, uncertainty becomes less frightening. Because no matter what happens, you know you can handle it. And that realization gave Ethan a sense of peace he had never known before. The story of the tightrope walker. A famous performer once amazed crowds by walking across a tightrope suspended high above the ground. People watched in awe. Some believed he could do it. Others doubted him. Then he asked the audience a question. Do you believe I can cross again? Everyone shouted yes. Then he asked, who is willing to climb onto my shoulders while I do it? Suddenly the crowd became silent. Belief is easy. Trust is different. Many people believe in growth. Believe in change. Believe in potential. But few truly trust the process. Few trust themselves enough to keep moving when results are invisible. Ethan realized that transformation required trust. Trust that small actions mattered. Trust that consistency would compound. Trust that growth was occurring even when he couldn't see it. Trust that he was becoming someone stronger. One day at a time. The freedom of uncertainty. Most people spend their lives trying to eliminate uncertainty. They want guarantees, perfect plans, absolute clarity, complete control. But life rarely provides these things. The future remains unpredictable. And that's exactly what makes life meaningful. Imagine watching a movie when you already know every scene, every plot twist, every ending. The experience would lose its magic. Life works the same way. Uncertainty is not a flaw. It's part of the experience. Ethan finally understood this. For years, he delayed action until he felt ready. Until he felt certain. Until he felt safe. Now he understood something profound. Readiness often comes after action, not before it. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's movement despite fear. And every meaningful chapter of his life had begun that way. The mountain was never the problem. One evening, Ethan returned to the mountain trail where so much of his reflection had taken place. The same path stretched before him. The same cliffs. The same trees. The same winding roads. Yet everything felt different. Not because the mountain had changed. Because he had. Years earlier, he viewed the mountain as an obstacle. A problem. A burden. Something standing between him and happiness. Now he saw it differently. The mountain wasn't blocking his growth. The mountain was creating it. Without challenges, he wouldn't have developed resilience. Without fear, he wouldn't have discovered courage. Without setbacks, he wouldn't have built self-trust. Without discomfort, he wouldn't have transformed. The mountain wasn't his enemy. It was his teacher. And every lesson had prepared him for the person he was becoming. The most important realization. As the sun began setting, Ethan sat quietly and reflected on everything he had learned. Then one final realization appeared. The life he wanted had never been waiting on the other side of the mountain. The life he wanted was being created during the climb. Think about that. Many people postpone happiness. They say, "I'll be happy when I get the promotion. I'll be happy when I lose the weight. I'll be happy when I make more money. I'll be happy when I achieve the goal." But life keeps moving, and if happiness is always waiting in the future, it never arrives. Ethan finally understood that fulfillment isn't found at the summit. It's found in the process. The growth, the learning, the becoming, the journey itself, the new beginning. Months later, friends began noticing changes in Ethan. Not dramatic changes, subtle ones. He seemed calmer, more focused, more present, more intentional. When challenges appeared, he didn't panic. When opportunities appeared, he didn't immediately sabotage them. When fear appeared, he listened without surrendering to it. The old patterns still surfaced occasionally. But they no longer controlled him. Because awareness had replaced autopilot. Choice had replaced reaction. Growth had replaced avoidance. And perhaps most importantly, self-trust had replaced self-doubt. He finally understood that transformation wasn't about becoming perfect. It was about becoming conscious. The invitation. Brianna Wiest's message is ultimately an invitation. An invitation to stop fighting yourself. To stop running from discomfort. To stop identifying with old pain. To stop letting fear decide your future. The mountain exists for all of us. Sometimes it appears as anxiety. Sometimes as procrastination. Sometimes as self-doubt. Sometimes as heartbreak. Sometimes as uncertainty. But whatever form it takes, the lesson remains the same. The obstacle is not here to destroy you. It is here to transform you. And every challenge contains the potential for growth. If you're willing to climb. Closing transition. As Ethan stood and began walking home, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because all his problems were solved. Not because life was perfect. But because he finally trusted himself. And when you trust yourself, the future becomes less frightening. The unknown becomes less intimidating. The mountain becomes less overwhelming. Because you understand something powerful. You are stronger than you think. And the person you're becoming is capable of far more than the person you used to be. But before we end this journey, there is one final lesson. The lesson that ties everything together. The lesson that reveals what it truly means to transform your life. Part 8. The grand finale. The person waiting at the top. As Ethan walked away from the mountain that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about a question. A simple question, yet one that had quietly followed him throughout his entire journey. Who was I really trying to become? For years, he thought the answer was obvious. Successful. Confident, disciplined, financially secure, respected, happy. But now, after everything he had learned, those answers felt incomplete. Because the deeper truth was this. He wasn't trying to become someone new. He was trying to return to the person he had always been beneath the fear. Beneath the conditioning. Beneath the self-doubt. Beneath the stories he told himself. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of the mountain is you. Personal growth isn't always about adding something. Sometimes it's about removing everything that was never truly you. The statue inside the stone. There is an old story about a sculptor. One day, Someone asked him how he created such beautiful statues. The sculptor smiled and replied, "I didn't create the statue. It was already inside the stone. I simply removed everything that wasn't supposed to be there." Ethan loved that story, because it perfectly described transformation. Most people think growth means becoming someone else. But often, growth means uncovering who you already are. The courage is already there. The wisdom is already there. The strength is already there. The confidence is already there. The problem is that fear covers it. Doubt covers it. Old wounds cover it. Limiting beliefs cover it. The mountain isn't hiding your weakness. The mountain is hiding your potential. And every step upward removes another layer. The life most people never live. As Ethan reflected on the people he had met throughout his life, he noticed something heartbreaking. Many people never truly live. They survive. They exist. They follow routines. They repeat patterns. They remain trapped inside fear. Not because they lack potential, but because they never challenge the stories controlling them. They spend years waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel confident, waiting for permission, waiting for certainty, waiting for the perfect moment. And while they're waiting, life keeps moving. Years pass. Opportunities pass. Dreams pass. The tragedy isn't failure. The tragedy is never trying. The tragedy is allowing fear to make decisions that should belong to you. And that's exactly what Brianna Wiest warns against. Because the greatest loss isn't losing. It's never discovering what you were capable of becoming. The two versions of yourself. Imagine meeting two versions of yourself. The first version is who you become if you continue avoiding growth. Continue repeating old habits. Continue surrendering to fear. Continue choosing comfort over transformation. Now imagine the second version. The version that faces challenges. Learns from failure. Heals emotional wounds. Builds better habits. Trusts themselves. Keeps climbing. Both versions exist as possibilities. And every day, your choices move you closer to one of them. Ethan realized that transformation wasn't a single decision. It was thousands of small decisions. Every choice mattered. Every habit mattered. Every action mattered. Because every decision was shaping the future version of himself. And the same is true for all of us. The power of one decision. Many people believe life changes through massive breakthroughs. Sometimes it does. But often, transformation begins with one decision. One conversation. One promise. One action. One moment of honesty. One step forward. Think about Ethan's journey. Everything changed when he asked a simple question. Why do I keep getting in my own way? That question created awareness. Awareness created understanding. Understanding created action. Action created growth. Growth created transformation. And it all began with a single moment. A single decision to stop avoiding the truth. Your own transformation may begin exactly the same way. With one honest moment. One courageous choice. One decision to start climbing. The gift hidden inside every mountain. Throughout this journey, Ethan learned something remarkable. Every mountain contains a gift. At first, the gift is invisible. All you see is struggle, difficulty, discomfort, fear. But hidden inside every challenge is an opportunity. An opportunity to become stronger, wiser, more resilient, more self-aware, more capable. The mountain doesn't create these qualities. It reveals them. Just as fire reveals the strength of steel. Challenges reveal the strength of character. And character is one of the few things that can never be taken away from you. Money can disappear. Jobs can change. Circumstances can shift. But the person you become remains. A letter to the listener. Before we finish, imagine that Ethan is speaking directly to you. Not as a character. Not as a stranger. But as someone who understands what it feels like to struggle. He might say, if you're feeling stuck, you're not alone. If you're afraid, that's okay. If you're overwhelmed, take one step. If you've failed, learn from it. If you've been avoiding something important, face it. If you've been doubting yourself, remember that growth takes time. And if the mountain feels impossible today, keep climbing anyway. Because mountains are never conquered in a single leap. They are conquered one step at a time, one breath at a time, one decision at a time. The real meaning of transformation. As the stars began appearing above the mountain, Ethan finally understood something that had escaped him for years. Transformation isn't becoming fearless. It's acting despite fear. Transformation isn't becoming perfect. It's continuing despite imperfection. Transformation isn't eliminating uncertainty. It's learning to trust yourself within uncertainty. And transformation isn't reaching a destination. It's becoming someone capable of creating a meaningful life. Again and again, for the rest of your life. The mountain is never truly finished. New challenges will appear, new fears will emerge, new opportunities for growth will arrive. But once you've learned how to climb, you stop fearing the mountain. Because you know you can handle the journey. Final closing remarks. So as we bring this summary of the mountain is you to an end, remember this. The obstacle in your path may not be your enemy. The fear you feel may not be your weakness. The challenge you're facing may not be your punishment. It may be your invitation. An invitation to heal, to grow, to evolve, to become the person you're capable of becoming. The mountain standing in front of you today may look impossible. But every mountain looks impossible from the bottom. And every summit was once just a distant dream. Keep climbing, keep growing, keep choosing courage over comfort. Keep choosing progress over perfection. Keep choosing transformation over fear. Because one day you'll look back and realize something extraordinary. The mountain didn't stop you. The mountain shaped you. And the person standing at the top is stronger, wiser, and more capable than the person who first began the climb. Thank you for joining this journey through the mountain is you by Brianna Wiest. If this story inspired you, take one lesson and apply it today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. Because your future isn't built by what you know. It's built by what you do. And the life you want may be waiting on the other side of the next step. Until next time, keep climbing your mountain.